72 hours. That's how long it had been since I watched the last of Ben's ashes surrender to the winds over the Pacific. One moment, he was a tangible weight in a cold, polished box in my hands. The next, he was a fleeting gray cloud against a steel blue sky, becoming one with the salt and the spray. 72 hours since I said my last goodbye, and now I was sitting in a different kind of cold, facing a different kind of enemy. The conference room on the 32nd floor was a glass cage, offering a panoramic view of a city that felt alien to me. I could see more than a dozen bridges from here, steel sinews connecting a world of commerce I never cared to understand. My world was one of red clay, dust, and the cramped confines of a cockpit. Here, the air was recycled and smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and expensive cologne. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper quiet hum of the climate control system. Across the mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine that reflected my own strained face, sat Ethan Vance, Ben's business partner. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my last 2 mortgage payments, and a smile that was all teeth. He slid a leather-bound folder across the vast expanse of wood. It stopped perfectly, squared with the edges of my side of the table. A precise, calculated move. "Maya," he began, his voice a smooth, oiled purr, the kind of voice that could sell sand in a desert. "First, again, my deepest condolences." Ben was a visionary. He let the word hang in the air, a cheap monument to a man he was about to betray. I just nodded. My dress blues felt stiff and foreign, a suit of armor for a battle I hadn't been trained for. My gaze remained fixed on him. In my line of work, you learn to read a man in seconds. You look at the eyes, the hands, the way he carries his weight. Ethan's eyes were flat, the eyes of a shark cruising for its next meal. Lifeless, except for a flicker of avarice. "I know this is a difficult time," he continued, steepling his manicured fingers. "Which is why I want to make this as painless as possible. This is a buyout offer for Ben's shares in the company. The number, you'll find, is exceptionally generous." He leaned forward, pushing the folder another inch toward me, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He stressed the word generous as if he were bestowing a great mercy upon a beggar, not trying to wrestle a billion-dollar empire from a dead man's widow. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see the numbers. This wasn't about money. It was about the kill. He saw weakness, a target of opportunity. "Take the offer, Maya," he urged, his synthetic sympathy curdling. "Buy a place on the beach. Travel. Go back to your simpler career. Focus on what you know. Simpler." The word landed like a physical blow. He was talking about the United States Marine Corps. He was talking about the career I had forged in fire and blood, the one that had given me the call sign Valkyrie after I hauled 2 wounded recon Marines out of a hot LZ under enemy fire. He dismissed it all as if it were a weekend hobby, like gardening or pottery. My knuckles turned white where I clenched them in my lap, hidden beneath the table. "You have 48 hours to sign," he said, the velvet glove finally coming off. The shark showed its teeth. "If you don't, my board has authorized me to initiate a hostile legal action. We'll contend that a grieving widow with a full-time military commitment is hardly qualified to hold a controlling interest in a cutting-edge tech firm. It will be messy. It will be public, and you will lose." He thought he had me cornered. His threat assessment was complete grief-stricken spouse check. A mere soldier utterly out of her depth in his corporate Shark Tank check. An easy victory. It was a classic pincer movement, designed to overwhelm and force a surrender. He had made a critical, fatal error. His intelligence was flawed. He saw Major Maya Olson, Uz MVC, a grunt who understood command structures and rules of engagement, but not stock options and fiduciary duties. He didn't see the woman Ben had spent the last 2 years training for this exact moment. He didn't see the mission Ben had been preparing me for all along. And he certainly didn't know that tucked inside my uniform pocket, resting against my heart, was a single encrypted flash drive. On it was Ben's last message to me. It wasn't a love letter. It was an order. 5 years. The memory hits me with the force of a breaching charge, blowing a hole in the present and dragging me back. The first time I felt the cold, slithering contempt from Ethan wasn't in a firefight or a back alley deal, but under the soft, flattering glow of Edison bulbs at their company's launch party. I'd come straight from a medal ceremony at Pendleton. It was a little past 7 in the evening, and I still wore my Marine Corps dress blues, the wool stiff and formal against my skin. The metal felt like a heavy, cold stone over my heart. I hadn't had time to change, and Ben insisted I come as I was, proud as hell. The moment I stepped into that cavernous industrial loft in Soma, I knew it was a mistake. The air, thick with the scent of expensive champagne and ambition, was a world away from the familiar smells of gun oil, sweat, and desert dust. It was a sea of Armani suits and designer hoodies, a language of venture capital and seed rounds I only understood through my late-night calls with Ben. He saw me immediately, his face breaking into a grin that could have lit up the whole Bay Area. He pushed through a circle of investors to wrap his arms around me. "There she is," he announced, his voice booming with pride. "Everyone, I want you to meet the real brains of this operation, Captain Over Rostova. My partner in everything." Before the warmth of his words could even settle, a shadow fell over us. Ethan. He slid into the circle with the predatory grace of a shark, a perfectly tailored suit hanging on his frame, a smirk playing on his lips. "Aicha. Bringing a gun to a knife fight, are we, Ben?" he said, his voice just loud enough to carry. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group. He wasn't looking at me, but at the uniform, at the medals, as if they were a costume I'd rented for the occasion. For the rest of the night, he became my self-appointed handler. With every introduction, the knife twisted. "This is Iva, Ben's very disciplined girlfriend." That calculated pause before discipline turned my entire career, my very identity, into a quirky, mildly amusing character flaw. He was painting me as a curiosity, a conversation piece. Ben's pet soldier. I tried to engage, to prove I was more than the uniform. I found myself in a conversation about market strategy and logistical scaling. Drawing on my own experience, I started to explain. The supply chain model is similar to how we establish a forward operating base. You have to secure your primary distribution nodes before. I never finished. Ethan's hand landed on my shoulder, a gesture that was both familiar and utterly dismissive. He squeezed, just a little too hard. "Don't worry your pretty little head about this boring stuff," he said to me, but his eyes were on the investors, a conspiratorial wink in them. "We'll handle the spreadsheets." My training kicked in. My posture straightened, my expression went neutral, the parade ground mask I had perfected over years of standing at attention. But beneath the surface, a cold fury was building. In Fallujah, the enemy was clear. They carried weapons. Here, the enemy wore a $2,000 watch and killed you with a smile and a condescending pat on the shoulder. He was actively, methodically, erasing me from my own story. Erasing the countless nights I'd spent on a satellite phone from some forgotten corner of Afghanistan, using my strategic training to help Ben wargame his business plan. Erasing the fact that my re-enlistment bonus had been the seed money that kept them afloat in the first year. In Ethan's narrative, I wasn't the silent company founder. I was just the arm candy, a strange war trophy Ben had brought home to show off. As the party started to wind down, close to midnight, I saw Ben across the room, beaming, caught in the tractor beam of his own success. He was oblivious, and I couldn't blame him. This was his dream. But as I watched, I saw Ethan put a hand on his shoulder, mirroring the same gesture he'd used on me, and whisper something in his ear. Ben laughed, but Ethan's eyes drifted across the room and found mine. There was no humor in them, only a cold, proprietary gleam. Later, as he handed me my coat, his fingers brushed against mine. "You know," he said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "Ben's a good man, a bit of an idealist. He needs someone looking out for his interests. Someone who understands this world." He let that hang in the air, the implication clear. He was the protector. I was the distraction. It wasn't just contempt in his eyes then. It was a quiet declaration of war. He wasn't just trying to sideline me from the business. He was staking a claim on Ben himself, and I was just an obstacle to be removed. Ethan's contempt wasn't just in his dismissive tone or the way his eyes would glaze over when I spoke in meetings. It had teeth. It had a history written in company ink and sealed with a public lie. The memory of it rises unbidden, sharp as the scent of cordite. It was a little over a year ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other until our world caught fire. The notification came through on a secure channel, a digital red flare, a hostile takeover bid from our biggest rival, Valerian Dynamics. But it was worse than that. They claimed to have a working copy of our core source code, the very soul of our company, the culmination of Ben's life's work. The message was clear. Surrender the company for pennies on the dollar, or they'd release our code and burn us to the ground. Panic ripped through the office like a shockwave. I remember Ethan, his face chalky white, pacing his glass-walled office like a caged animal. His Harvard MBA hadn't prepared him for this. He saw an unstoppable force and endgame. He wanted to negotiate, to salvage what he could, to sell Ben's dream for scrap metal. I saw something different. I saw a feint, a maneuver designed to provoke a panicked response. It was too loud, too public. In Kandahar, you learn to fear the silence, not the shouting. The enemy who announces his position is either a fool or is trying to make you look in the wrong direction. We don't fold, I said, my voice cutting through the hysteria in the emergency board meeting. We hold the line and we gather intel. He looked at me as if I just suggested charging a machine gun nest with a pocket knife. This isn't one of your war games, Maya! This is the real world! His world, maybe. In mine, the rules were simpler. You analyze, you adapt, you overcome. Or you die. Ben, bless his heart, saw the steel in my eyes. He turned to his brother. Let her work, was all he said. For the next 2 days, I didn't sleep. I turned our small apartment into a tactical operations center. The scent of stale coffee filled the air as I commandeered Ben's high-spec rig, my fingers flying across the keyboard. This wasn't about hacking. This was about intelligence, the kind they teach you at Fort Huachuca. I was conducting a deep dive OSINT analysis, pulling every piece of publicly available data on Valerian Dynamics. Press releases, SEC filings, executive travel logs, the LinkedIn profiles of their lead engineers, even forum posts from disgruntled ex-employees. I was building a pattern, a map of their corporate life. It was a little past midnight on the second night when I found it. A tiny discrepancy, a digital thread sticking out from a perfectly woven lie. Valerian's lead coder had posted a triumphant photo from a climbing trip in Yosemite. The timestamp on the photo, cross-referenced with flight manifests I dug up, put him on the other side of the country during the exact week they claimed to have finalized their acquisition of our code. He couldn't have been in 2 places at once. It was a bluff, a desperate, high-stakes bluff. They had a piece of our code, an old, buggy version maybe, but not the crown jewels. They were trying to scare us into giving them the rest. I drew up the counter-offensive on our kitchen whiteboard, the same one we used for grocery lists. It was a targeted information warfare campaign. We would leak specific, verifiable data that subtly proved their claim was impossible, without revealing our own hand. We'd feed it to a single, trusted tech journalist, letting them break the story. It would discredit Valerian, crater their stock price, and make them a laughingstock. Ben read the entire plan, his eyes tracing every line. He looked up at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. It's bold. It's dangerous. It's perfect. We executed it just before sunrise. It worked better than I could have imagined. By noon, Valerian Dynamics was in full retreat, their lie exposed. We hadn't just survived, we had won. Decisively. The press conference was a circus of flashing lights and reporters shouting questions. And there was Ethan, front and center, basking in the glow of a victory he'd been ready to run from. He spoke of our resilience, our innovative spirit. But when asked about the brilliant strategy that turned the tide, he smiled his politician's smile. He talked about sleepless nights and gut feelings. He took every ounce of the credit. He didn't mention my name once. I stood at the back of the room, invisible. The sting of it was a familiar cold, the same betrayal you feel when a politician sends you to war and forgets your name when you come home in a box. That night, Ben held me on our worn-out sofa, the city lights twinkling outside our window. "I'm sorry, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with anger for me. He sees your strength, and it terrifies him. He sees a weapon he doesn't know how to control. He tilted my chin up. He doesn't get it. That strength isn't a threat. It's the greatest asset we have. Ben always saw me. Not the broken soldier, but the strategist. Not the liability, but the force multiplier. He was my ally, my fire support in this concrete jungle. His love was my armor. But as I sit here now, a year later, replaying that memory, a new, chilling thought crystallizes from the fog of the past. It wasn't just fear of my strength that made Ethan erase me from the narrative. Looking back at the data, at Valerian's improbable move, at Ethan's immediate readiness to surrender, it was something more. It was the calculated panic of a man not just afraid of losing, but of being found out. The real enemy isn't always the one shooting at you from across the field. Sometimes, he's standing right behind you, telling you where to run. The house was finally quiet. The last well-meaning neighbor had departed a little past 9, leaving behind a casserole that smelled of sympathy and processed cheese. I'd spent hours accepting condolences, my face a stoic mask I'd perfected over 2 tours in Afghanistan. But now, alone in the silence that Ben's absence carved into the air, the mask cracked. Grief isn't a wave, as people say. It's a vacuum. It sucks the air from your lungs, the warmth from your skin, the sound from a room. I walked through our home, each step an echo in a space that was once filled with his booming laughter. His boots were still by the door, caked with mud from the hike we were supposed to take last weekend. His favorite flannel was slung over the back of a chair. It felt like he'd just stepped out, like he'd be back any minute to grab me from behind and spin me around the kitchen. Sleep was a foreign country I couldn't get a visa for. By what must have been 3 in the morning, the 4 walls of our bedroom felt like they were closing in. I couldn't just lie there, marinating in memories. I needed a mission. I needed to do something. So, I went to his closet. His scent hit me first, a mix of cedar, worn leather, and the faint, clean smell of gun oil that never quite washed out of his gear. This was my husband. Not the polished tech CEO Ethan presented to the world, but the man who felt most at home in the wild, with a rucksack on his back. I started sorting, a familiar, methodical process that kept my hands busy and my mind from splintering. I folded his shirts into perfect military squares. I organized his climbing ropes, coiling them with the precision he'd taught me. Each item was a ghost, a story. The worn carabiner from our first climb in Yosemite, the scuffed compass that guided him through a whiteout on Mount Rainier. My fingers brushed against a worn, leather-bound book tucked behind a stack of topographical maps. His old climbing journal. He took this thing everywhere, documenting every ascent with sketches of the routes, notes on weather conditions, and his own rambling thoughts. It was more sacred to him than any mission log. I sat on the floor, the rough fibers of the rug pressing into my legs, and opened it. His familiar scrawl filled the pages. I smiled through a fresh wave of tears, reading about his frustration with a difficult pitch, his awe at a sunrise from 10,000 feet. These were the moments that made him Ben. I flipped through the years, tracing our life together through the mountains we'd conquered. The pages grew thinner towards the back, the entries more sporadic as the company he built with Ethan consumed more and more of his time. I was about to close it when I reached the very last entry, dated just a few months ago. It was uncharacteristically brief, just a note about testing some new gear on a local trail. As I turned the page, a small, folded piece of paper slipped from the sleeve in the back cover and fluttered onto the floor. It wasn't a receipt or a stray note, it was a message. Ben's handwriting was rushed, jagged, unlike his usually calm script. My heart began to pound a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. If Ethan shows his true colors, check the Everest simulation. Password Valkyrie. I read it once, twice. The words burned into my brain, searing away the fog of grief with the white-hot intensity of a flare. Every nerve in my body went on high alert. This wasn't a random note. It was a contingency plan, a dead man's switch. Everest. It was the code name for their very first project, a hyper-realistic VR simulation for high-altitude training. It had been a catastrophic failure, a money pit that they'd buried and never spoke of again. It was the perfect digital graveyard, a place no one would ever think to look. And the password. Valkyrie. My call sign from my days flying medevac choppers. A name only a handful of people knew. A name he only used when things were serious, when he was speaking not to his wife, but to a fellow soldier. The note wasn't a suspicion. It was a confirmation. My optimistic, trusting husband, the man who saw the good in everyone, had seen the serpent hiding behind Ethan's smile. He'd known, maybe for months, that his partner was a threat. He knew and he'd started preparing. He wasn't just leaving breadcrumbs, he was leaving me an armory. The sorrow in my chest didn't vanish. It crystallized. It morphed into something cold, hard, and sharp. The mission he'd given me was clear. This was my final order from him. My grief now had a target. And I had my intel. Ben's laptop felt heavier than its weight in titanium and silicon. In the quiet of my apartment, sometime in the dead of night, lifting the lid felt like arming an IED. The soft click of the latch was a detonator pin sliding into place. My own reflection stared back from the dark screen-hollowed eyes, a tension in the jaw that hadn't eased since I got the call. For a moment, I saw the ghost of a younger soldier, prepping for a mission deep in hostile territory, the air thick with the unknown. Powering it on, I was met with Ben's familiar desktop, a stark, clean interface, a photo of a mountain peak I didn't recognize as the background. It was organized with the same ruthless efficiency. He used to lay out his kit before a patrol. Everything had a purpose, a place. No clutter. But I knew Ben. The real defenses were never on the surface. I bypassed his standard login easily. He always used the name of the stray dog we'd adopted at the FOB and started digging. I navigated through project folders and business plans, the digital blueprint of the life he'd built, after trading his uniform for a suit. It felt like walking through a museum of a man I was only just beginning to understand I'd lost. Deep in a partition drive I found it. A single folder named Everest Simulation. It was triple encrypted. My first few password attempts, call scenes, operation names, his mother's birthday were met with a cold, digital rejection. Access denied. I leaned back, the leather of my chair groaning in protest. What was I missing? I closed my eyes, picturing him, not in a boardroom, but in the dust and sun of Kandahar, squinting at a map. His fingers tracing coordinates. That was it. I typed in the 8-digit grid of the extraction point from our worst firefight, the one we barely walked away from. The screen flickered. Access granted. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a failed project. This was an intel dossier. It was a kill package, assembled with the patience of a sniper. Inside, subfolders were labeled not with names, but with dates, times, and locations. The primary target was clear: Ethan. Ben had been running a full-blown counterintelligence operation against his own partner. I clicked open the first file. It was an audio recording. Ethan's voice, slick as gun oil, speaking to an offshore banker about mitigating the risk of Ben's increasingly erratic behavior. Another file contained screenshots of encrypted emails, detailing Ethan's plan to leverage the key person clause to seize control of the company, framing it as a move to stabilize things after Ben's inevitable breakdown. He wasn't just a corporate shark, he was a predator, circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ben knew. He knew, and he was preparing the battlefield, but the real ordnance was in a file named Immutable Testament.opord. The extension operations order sent a jolt through me. I opened it. It wasn't written in dense legalese. It was written for me, a soldier. He explained the core of his plan, using analogies he knew I'd grasp. He described the blockchain not as a digital ledger, but as a network of hidden ammo caches. They can't bomb one location, Sarge, the text read, his voice practically echoing in my head. The asset is everywhere and nowhere. It's a ghost. He had used the technology to forge a new partnership agreement, an unbreakable codicil to his will. It was digitally signed, verified by thousands of anonymous nodes, and completely outside Ethan's control. The order was simple: upon his death, his entire stake in the company, all of it, including majority voting rights, was to be transferred directly to me. It was a posthumous coup d'etat, a digital dead man's switch designed to bypass Ethan entirely and put me in command. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. It was all there. A weapon, loaded and aimed. At the bottom of the document was the activation protocol. It required a two-factor key, a biometric scan, and a passphrase. His final command. The screen shifted to a simple interface, a fingerprint icon, and a blinking cursor in a text box. This was it. The grief that had been a suffocating fog was beginning to burn away, replaced by the cold, clear fire of purpose. This was a mission. My mission. I leaned forward, my hand steady, and pressed my thumb against the laptop's small, square scanner. A green light pulsed. Biometric ID confirmed. Awaiting passphrase. The cursor blinked, waiting. I knew the phrase. It was from the last text he ever sent me, hours before the crash. I'd thought it was just him being him. A simple sign-off. See you at the top. My fingers hovered over the keys, ready to type, ready to execute his final order. But then my gaze snagged on a file I'd missed, tucked away in the main directory. A single, small folder, almost hidden. It was labeled "If she hesitates." My hand froze. A contingency. Ben always had a contingency. What the hell did he know that I didn't? What was he warning me about? The first shot wasn't a bullet. It was a line of red text on my screen, blinking in the sterile quiet of my home office just before sunrise. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. My corporate credentials, my key to the kingdom Ben and I had built, were suddenly worthless. Ethan had severed my supply lines. It was a classic siege tactic: cut the target off from resources, starve them out. Then came the second wave, the psychological warfare. It arrived a few hours later, via an anonymous text containing a single link. The headline on the tech blog screamed at me, "Concerns mount over Phoenix Dynamics Company, founder's mental stability following tragedy." The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, quoting unnamed sources close to the company who worried about my erratic behavior and emotional fragility since Ben's death. They weaponized my grief, turning the very thing that made me human into a liability. Ethan was painting me as a loose cannon, an unstable widow unfit to lead. He was trying to get me dishonorably discharged from my own company. For a full minute, I just stared at the screen, the hum of the servers in the closet sounding like a distant battle. The rage came on hot and fast, a white-hot flash behind my eyes. I wanted to storm into the office, grab Ethan by his $1,000 suit, and show him what unstable really looked like. But then, a voice echoed in my head, Ben's voice from a dusty firing range in Quantico years ago. "Anger is a tool, Maya. You don't let it use you. You aim it." I closed my eyes, my hands flat on the cool surface of the desk. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Tactical breathing. Control the internal chaos before engaging the external. Ethan wanted me to react emotionally. He was baiting me, hoping I'd give the board of directors a real-life example of the exact instability he was fabricating. He was counting on me to be a grieving woman. He'd forgotten I was also a soldier. My hands moved with renewed purpose, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I navigated back to the secure partition, the digital footlocker Ben had left me. To the Everest folder. I knew Ethan couldn't touch this. It was air-gapped from the main network, protected by encryption that would make the NSA blush. Inside, nestled among the financial projections and contingency plans, was a single video file I hadn't seen before. File name contingency 0 hour.mp4. I double-clicked. Ben's face filled my screen. He wasn't smiling his easy, relaxed smile. This was Commander Evans, the man who had led missions in places that didn't officially exist. His eyes were clear, his jaw set, and he looked directly into the lens as if he were looking right at me, right now. "Mia," he began, his voice calm and steady, a rock in the storm of my emotions. "If you're watching this, it means Ethan has made his move. He's not just going for control, he's going for scorched earth. He'll attack with chaos, Maya. He'll use confusion, misinformation, and your own grief as his weapons." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "You must fight with order. Use his own tactics against him. Every anonymous source he plants, every account he freezes, every lie he tells creates a data trail. He thinks he's invisible, but he's just kicking up dust. Don't get angry." He paused, and for a fleeting second, I saw the husband I loved beneath the commander's steel. Execute. This is your battlefield now. Phoenix is your objective. Then he looked away from the camera just for a moment, as if checking his six. When he looked back, the warmth was gone, replaced by pure, unyielding command. Complete the mission. The screen went black. There was no I love you, no goodbye. He hadn't left me a final memory. He had left me a final order. It was the ultimate act of faith, the deepest trust one soldier could place in another. My mission wasn't to mourn him anymore. It was to win his war. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy weight in my chest, but now it had a purpose. It was fuel. Ethan attacked with chaos, but chaos leaves a trail. And I knew exactly where to find the first breadcrumb. The blog post wasn't truly anonymous. The reporter had a byline, and every reporter has a price. The 48th hour bled away with the cold, sterile hum of the building's air conditioning. 0 hour. Back in the service, this was the moment before you kicked in a door, the world narrowing to the beat of your own heart in your ears. Here, in the glass and steel canyons of downtown, the feeling was eerily the same. This was just another kind of breach. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I arrived at 5 minutes to. I walked past the receptionist, who looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I gave her a small, tight nod. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass cage with a panoramic view of a city that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Inside, Ethan stood at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. He looked like a king addressing his court. His suit was perfect, his smile practiced, his confidence a tangible, suffocating force in the room. The other board members, a collection of gray-haired men in expensive suits, looked at him with deference. They were his soldiers, not Ben's. He was mid-monologue, his voice smooth as bourbon, and in these challenging times, what Vector Dynamics needs above all is stability. A steady hand on the tiller. We must look to the future, not be anchored by the tragedies of the past. He glanced at the door as it swung shut behind me, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before being replaced by that mask of feigned sympathy. Ah, Sarah, we were just discussing the transition. I didn't say a word. I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy blanket. The other men shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Ethan cleared his throat, his composure faltering for a fraction of a second. He was expecting lawyers. He was expecting a fight on his terms in his arena. He wasn't expecting me. Just me. As I was saying, he continued, his voice a little tighter now, I am prepared to lead us through this. Therefore, I call for a vote of no confidence in Sarah Riley's ability to act as interim CEO and to remove her from the board, effective immediately. He raised his hand, ready to begin the count. That was my cue. Before you do that, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a field radio breaking static. Every head turned towards me. Ben has one last presentation. A nervous chuckle went around the table. Ethan scoffed. Sarah, this isn't the time for sentimentality. We all grieve, but the company must. I ignored him. I walked to the head of the table, placing my encrypted laptop beside his neatly arranged papers. I connected it to the large projection screen on the wall. The soft click of the HDMI cable locking into place sounded like a round being chambered. The screen flickered from the Vector Dynamics logo to my blank desktop. Gentlemen, I said, my gaze sweeping across each face at the table, lingering for a moment on Ethan's. Vector Dynamics was built on innovation and integrity. Ben believed in fail-safes. For our gear, for our people, and for his life's work. I placed my thumb on the laptop's biometric scanner. A small box appeared on the screen, awaiting a voice command. I leaned in, my voice clear and unwavering, the name Ben and I had chosen for his ultimate contingency plan. A name for a protector, a chooser of the slain. Valkyrie. The screen went black for a second, then lit up with an interface that was stark and unfamiliar to the men in the room. But I recognized the design. It was military-grade, built on a blockchain protocol. Lines of code scrolled, cryptographic hashes validating in real time. At the top, in bold, uncompromising letters, the immutable will of Benjamin Carter Riley. Below it, Ben's digital signature, time-stamped and authenticated across a dozen decentralized nodes, unalterable. undeniable. Ethan had gone pale. What is this? Some kind of joke. This is inadmissible. His protest was cut short as a video file automatically began to play. And there he was. Ben, not sick, not fading. He was in his home office, a few months before his last deployment. He looked directly into the camera, his expression calm, his voice steady. The voice I heard every night in my dreams. If you are watching this, it means two things, Ben began. First, that I'm gone. And second, that my partner, Ethan Ford, has tried to usurp control of the company we built together. A collective gasp went through the room. Ethan shot to his feet, sputtering. This is a deep fake. A fabrication. Please continue, Mr. Ford, I said softly, never taking my eyes off the screen. Let's see how your story holds up against his. Ben, on the screen, continued as if he'd heard him. He laid it all out with cold, methodical precision. The offshore accounts. The shell corporations registered in Panama. The gradual siphoning of R&D funds into a secret project Ethan was building on the side. He showed scanned documents, encrypted transaction logs, everything. The board watched, their faces turning from skepticism to shock to stone-cold fury. Ethan's entire narrative, his carefully constructed play, was dismantled in minutes. He wasn't a savior, he was a traitor. He sank back into his chair, a broken man. The smugness was gone, replaced by the wild-eyed panic of a cornered animal. He had been exposed, not by a grieving widow's legal team, but by the ghost of the man he had betrayed. The video was nearing its end. Ben's face softened. He looked right at the camera, but I knew he was looking at me. They will tell you this was about business. It wasn't. It was about protecting our legacy. Protecting our people. Protecting you, Sarah. He paused, and for a second I thought it was over. But then he leaned in closer, a new, urgent light in his eyes. And Sarah, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. There's one more thing. Project Valkyrie, it's not just a dead man's switch. It's a key. What you just authenticated gives you access. Look for file 72. The real work is just beginning. Be careful. I love you. The screen went black. The room was utterly silent, save for the sound of Ethan's ragged, shallow breaths. The board members weren't looking at him anymore. They were all looking at me, but I wasn't looking back. I was staring at the blank screen, the two words echoing in my mind. File 72. The boardroom smelled of expensive leather and stale fear. Ethan sat opposite me, his face a blotchy canvas of disbelief and fury. The board members, a jury of gray suits, avoided his gaze. They had seen the data, the irrefutable proof of his sabotage I had laid out with the cold precision of a mission briefing. The vote was a formality, a quiet, unanimous execution. When the chairman said the words, effective immediately, Ethan didn't explode. He just deflated, a punctured balloon of arrogance, and was escorted out by security. There was no victory lap, no triumphant satisfaction. Securing the objective just felt quiet. The hollow echo after the blast. The chairman, a man named Sterling with eyes like chips of ice, turned to me. The board is in agreement, Ms. Reed. Interim CEO, effective now. The title landed on my shoulders with the weight of a fully loaded rucksack. CEO, me. I thought of Ben, and for a fleeting second, I could almost hear his booming laugh echoing in the sterile room, picturing me, his gritty sergeant, commanding a squad of software engineers instead of a fire team. My first order of business wasn't a purge. That would have been Ethan's way. Instead, I called our lead engineer, a brilliant but perpetually nervous man named Marcus Vance, into Ben's, now my office. He walked in like a man heading to his own firing squad, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. He'd been the one Ethan suppressed the most, stealing his ideas and burying his projects. He probably figured his association with me had sealed his fate. Marcus, I began, gesturing to the chair opposite the huge mahogany desk. I've reviewed your personnel file, and your buried project proposals. Project Nightfall in particular. His head snapped up, a flicker of panic in his eyes. That was just a concept. Ethan said it was a non-starter. Ethan was wrong, I said flatly. I'm making it our priority flagship project, and I need someone to lead it. The position of Chief Technology Officer is open. It's yours if you want it. The color drained from his face, then rushed back. For a moment, I thought he might pass out. CTO, he whispered, the word foreign on his tongue. We don't leave our best soldiers behind, Marcus. I told him, the words feeling more natural to me than any corporate jargon. Ben believed in you. So do I. Now go make him proud. He left the office walking 3 inches taller. It felt better than firing Ethan. A week later, I stood at a podium in front of the press. My hands were steady on the wood, my voice as even as it was when calling in coordinates under fire. I announced our new direction, our renewed commitment to innovation. And then I delivered my real message. Ben Olsen didn't just want to build a company, I said, my eyes scanning the room, meeting the flashes of cameras without blinking. He wanted to build a legacy. He believed that the discipline, the integrity, and the relentless problem-solving skills forged in the military were this country's greatest untapped resource. That's why, today, Olsen Dynamics is officially launching the Ben Olsen Innovation Fund. I laid out the plan, a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, seeded with a significant portion of our profits, dedicated to funding and mentoring tech startups founded by military veterans. This wasn't charity. It was an investment. It was my promise to Ben, made public. It was turning our shared grief into a new mission. 3 months passed. The company stabilized. Project Nightfall was accelerating beyond our wildest projections under Marcus's fierce guidance. The first round of applicants for the fund was overwhelming. For the first time since that day in Kandahar, I felt like I could breathe. Just after sunset, I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Olsen Dynamics building, the city lights beginning to glitter below like a fallen constellation. The evening air was cool, a welcome change from the recycled air of the office. I wasn't in uniform, a phantom limb I still felt at times. I wasn't in black, the color of mourning that had been my second skin for so long. I wore a charcoal gray business suit, tailored and sharp. A new kind of armor. The dull ache in my thigh, where the shrapnel had torn through, was a faint, familiar rhythm against the alien silk of my blouse. I had done it. I'd followed Ben's final order. I had protected his creation, honored his name. As I stared out at the sprawling metropolis, a sense of peace settled over me. The mission was complete, or so I thought. Returning to my office, I found my assistant Clara hovering by her desk, her expression anxious. "Ma'am," she said, her voice low. "There's a gentleman waiting in your office. He doesn't have an appointment, but he was very insistent. He said you would want to see him." I pushed open the heavy glass door. A man in a simple, well-worn tweed jacket stood by the window, his back to me. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, and turned as I entered. His eyes were kind, but held a deep, lawyerly seriousness. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Forgive the intrusion. My name is Howard Finch. I was Ben's personal attorney. Not for the company, for him." My guard went up instantly. "I've worked with the company's legal team. I've never heard your name." "You wouldn't have," he replied smoothly. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. It wasn't a standard corporate envelope. It was closed with a wax seal, impressed with a family crest I'd never seen before. Ben was a man of many contingencies. He left this with me years ago. My instructions were very specific. I was only to deliver it to you personally, and only after you had secured total control of the company from Ethan Hayes. He placed the heavy package on the polished surface of my desk. The silence in the room was deafening. Every instinct I had, honed on battlefields and in boardrooms, screamed that the war I thought I had just won was only the opening skirmish-ish. Ben's last order, it turned out, wasn't his last at all. It was just the beginning.